Hey folks, it is good to be here. It is good to be seeing you and talking with you. Hopefully you can see me in the webinar that's being shared, the video screen. Hopefully you can also see my slides. If at any point something goes wrong and you can't hear my voice, you can't see me or the slides, go into the chat, make sure that you put some information there. We'll get someone to try and help you with that. We're talking about Magento 1 and we're talking about end of life. And if you don't know already, by the end of this month, Adobe will call for or will announce, has already announced that they will end or terminate any support for the old Magento 1 codebase. It means from July 1st going forward, they're not going to send you any more patches. They're not going to publish any more updates to the Magento 1 codebase. And that's not a horrible thing. We want to be very clear. An end of life situation is a normal situation. End of life in the digital world, in the software world, you get to a point where all your hardware has continued to evolve, all the software practices and development practices have continued to evolve, and at some point you look back and you say, it's no longer worth editing that code base, supporting that code base, given the infrastructure, the operating systems. In the time that Magento 1 has been out, operating systems have changed, versions of those operating systems have changed, PHP has changed, coding and deployment practices have changed, hardware infrastructure has changed. So it makes sense at some level for Adobe to say, hey, heads up, we're gonna call it quits. And they made the announcement years ago. They adjusted the date, made the announcement again, and we've had a lot of time to look at the other options and consider the other options. But if you are a Magento 1 store owner, or if you're an agency that works with Magento 1 store owners, you know that the general mode of thought when your online store is working is don't touch it. If it's working, don't mess with it. I don't want to, do something that might break it. I don't want to do something that might completely bring my store down. And so we have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, even 100,000 stores that are still running Magento 1 in the US, and are sitting there going, well, now what? What happens? So that's the whole topic of this webinar is, what do you do when you get to this end of life, right? And the sad thing about it is, because some people are so eager to get you to move to Magento 2, that now they've created a lot of anxiety. They've sent out messages that are filled with half-truths, right? There's slants on the data. And so it makes everybody really anxious and stressed. And what I want to spend the next 30 minutes, I know Gaspar said 45, but we'll probably try and spend about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. I want to spend the next 30 minutes talking about some of the statements that you may have heard, misstatements or shaped statements that you may have heard over the last several months, that I just want to pull into extreme focus and say, okay, is that really an issue, or is that not so much an issue, et cetera, right? So we're gonna, these guys have talked about it as myth busting. We're just gonna tackle them and go, what's true and what's not true? And what can you do in this situation given all that? So that's the driver, right? Which you can see here, with so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? FUD out there, right? What we need to do is dig under the hood and get the details straight. You gotta be clear on what's true and what's not true. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, right? But if you take your car to get an oil change, right? The one thing you want is to change the oil. Now, over the course of my lifetime, I was told initially, like, you got to take your car like every 2 months or every 3 months, and it was every 3,000 miles, and it keeps adjusting, partly because the technology in cars change. But I would go, right? If you've ever done this, you take your car in, you go to get an oil change, and then the guy shows up at your window, right? I go to a place where I can still sit in my car. I don't even have to walk away from the car. I can sit in my car because I drive over this spot where they have in the actual mechanic shop, they have this whole pit underneath my car. So they don't have to raise my car. They just climb down into this little pit. They're underneath my car. They're doing work. And that's where they're going to change the oil. And I go in to get my oil changed, right? And then someone shows up and says, by the way, here, look at this really dirty filter for your air conditioning or for something else, right? Your window washing fluids or whatever. I go in for one thing and they show me something else and they say, look at how dirty this is. So invariably, what do? Okay, fine, replace it. But the next time I go, they're going to show me a dirty one again. And I'm like, wait, do I need to replace this every 3 months when I do my oil change? Oh no, this can last for 8 months. Well, then why are we doing it again, right? It's not that it's not true. Sometimes people tell us something and they say, this is dirty, and you go, it is dirty. But is it supposed to be dirty? Is that the normal thing? Like, how do I know what's real or what's not real? How do I know what's right or what's not right? I need someone to tell me. I need someone to highlight, is this statement on its own true, but does it impact me or does it not impact me? So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna get the details straight. So the first thing that I've heard, and I read, right, in an email that a host sent out, and part of this dynamic was months ago, hosts were sending merchants, customers, site owners, they were sending them an email saying, listen, if you don't upgrade, we're not gonna support you, you're gonna be out of compliance, blah, 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 blah. And so your site is gonna break. Right? Your site is not going to work. If you don't want to change with us, you're going to have to go find another host somewhere else. You're going to have to move your site. You have to do something because on July 1st, your site won't work. And then I caught one nuance from one of the vendors that sent an email that said, and you won't have access to it. And you go, what? I want you to imagine, again, since I started with this car metaphor, I want you to imagine that your car broke down and then suddenly like, oh, you know what? Not only is your car broken down and it doesn't work anymore, but we stole your keys, right? We stole them. They're gone. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense. And I'll tell you, on my honeymoon, I rented a Jeep and my wife and I drove out to this beach in Maui and I mistakenly had the Jeep keys in my swim trunks and I went out in the ocean and when I came back, I didn't have my keys. I legitimately was broken down, car not moving, and I didn't have keys, right? We had to call, this is long before Uber or anything else, so we had to call the guy at the rental stand and say, I need my car back. I need to get another pair of keys to drive this car. And they said, great, but we only have one person in the office. So I had to pay a taxi to drive over there, right? Yes, I'm telling you right now, I invented Uber. So I had to pay a guy to drive over there in a car, pick up something and drive it back to me. And it was awesome. I got the second set of keys and I was able to drive again. But that's not normal. If a car breaks down, you don't normally lose your keys. If a car breaks down, the car breaks down, and then you call someone out and you fix it and then you move on. Well, in this case, people are saying your website's going to break down, which is not true, and you're not going to get access to it, which is not true. When you hit July 1, when we have reached end of life for Magento 1, and July 1st hits of this year, which is just a couple weeks away, your website won't suddenly break, and you will have full access, and it will keep running, it'll keep doing transactions, everything will keep working, and you will still have access to that code. And I just need you to know that truth, right? Because you will get emails, you will hear messages, you will see people on webinars talking about how you have to make the move, and they're coming from a good place, right? They're saying, heads up, this is software that in their eyes won't ever be supported again, and so you should move to something that will be supported. You go, okay, that's fair. In and of itself, that's a legit message. Hey, software's old, you should look at new stuff. Great, I have no problem with that. But telling people, hey, your site's gonna break down, you won't be able to collect any money, you won't be able to run any orders, and you won't even be able to access it, that's a lie, all right? We're talking about, will you be able to collect money, right? So here's the second myth I hear all the time, right? And that is, your site will no longer be PCI compliant. You're not gonna be able to take in any money, and the only way to fix that is to re-platform. This is so not true. This is so not, so let's back up and understand who's telling you that and why they're telling you that, right? When someone says you're not going to be PCI compliant. You go, well, are you the people that actually define PCI compliance? Are you the people that check for PCI compliance? Companies like TrustWave are the companies that will monitor your website, right? You know, once a quarter, you're going to go in and do a scan of the software of your stack, and they're going to tell you whether or not there's an issue or not, whether or not you are PCI compliant or not. So if TrustWave tells you something, you go, yeah, okay. But if PayPal tells you something, PayPal doesn't certify you as PCI compliant. And by the way, I know that PayPal sent out an email, right? They sent out an email because they had hundreds of thousands of sites globally that they were messaging to, and they had to explain it broadly, and they were getting their own pressure to do it. And I know they were getting that pressure because I watched some of their internal emails, right? And I'm telling you, they had pressure, but when we went in to poke at it directly, and when others, agency partners and others went in to poke at them directly and say, are you saying, are you going to take on a different role than you've normally taken? They go, oh, no. We're not determining whether or not a site is PCI compliant or not. You go, okay. So you don't define whether or not a store is PCI compliant. They're like, no. Okay, and you're not going to turn off your gateway on July 1st. No. And you'll still process orders from anyone insofar as the order looks legit. Well, yes, of course. Okay, so you understand that's completely the opposite of what you just wrote in this email? Well, no, what we were trying to do is encourage people to move to Magento 2. And you go, well, you overshot encourage by a long shot, right? It's one thing to say, yeah, we want to encourage people to look at their options, etc. Understand that if you continue down this road without any assistance, you're going to be left on your own. And if something were to happen and you were to be outside of compliance, then you'd be liable to fines, right? I mean, there are things that are real about end of life, but telling people you're not going to be PCI compliant and the only way to fix it is to replatform, that's a little extreme. Here's the truth. PCI compliance is defined by a standard body group, but more importantly, is verified and validated by companies who do scans. Those scans, right, look at the software stack. Those scans are not looking for Magento 1 or Magento 2. They're looking for vulnerabilities in the code. They're looking for open issues that are related to the security of being able to process a transaction. And so when TrustWave runs a scan, it doesn't say, ooh, I found something that says it's Magento 1. You're not PCI compliant. That's not what they do. They're looking for actual issues related to PCI compliance. And if they find one, whether your code is Magento 1 or whether your code is a homegrown e-commerce solution, if they find it, they will report it to you. You have to go fix it. If you don't fix it, you're no longer PCI compliant. And that's logical. That makes sense, right? If I had handwritten my own platform for e-commerce and then suddenly they found an open issue and we didn't fix it, then we would no longer be PCI compliant, right? But insofar as we did fix it, whether it was Magento 1 or anything else, then we would stay in compliance. So when you hear people saying you got to move to Magento 2, you go, well, that's one option. And it's a good option. It's a legit option for many people. But if there were another option to actually protect my Magento 1 store for some period of time while I look at options, while I make a migration, while I do anything else, that would also legitimately be a way to do it. So will you be able to collect money on July 1st? Yes. Will you need to replatform? No. That is not the case, right? You need some way to make sure that when TrustWave or someone else runs a scan, you invite to run a scan on your platform, on your infrastructure, and you get that report, you need to be able to go to your host, whoever your host is, and say, hey, some of these things look like they're for you to do, and there's some things that you may want to give to your developer or agency and say, these look like things you need to do, and there's some things you might want to do. Insofar as you have partners to help you do those things and do them with, within a timeline, you will stay PCI compliant. Nothing about the Magento 1 codebase itself explicitly says you're out of PCI compliance. Now, should you keep updating your software? Should you keep protecting yourself from open issues and the changing dynamics of technology? Yes. Should you protect your customers' data? Yes. So all those things are very, very good. And if that was the full extent of the sum total of the emails you got, we would have said yes. right? But unfortunately, that wasn't. Instead, you started hearing this stuff, and that's not great. Now, we've been talking to financial gateways, we've been talking to financial processors, we've been talking to banks, we've been talking to a lot of people. I've probably talked to one of the financial dynamic players, someone in that financial space, multiple times a week, every week for several weeks, right? And every time someone publishes a new document saying, you know, this is what this means, we have to parse through it and go, is that what it really means? Or are there assumptions baked into it? The biggest assumption here, right, especially when we talk about PCI compliance, if you read it or saw it in the Visa statement, if you read it or saw it in the PayPal statement, they come down to this idea that since the vendor, right, in this case, Adobe or the Magento organization, since the vendor is no longer providing these patches, then, you know, this little section of PCI compliance says, hey, if it's no longer supported, then you're going to be in trouble. We go, yeah, we understand. But the community edition, for example, of Magento is open source, which means there's not the vendor, it's any vendor. And in fact, Nexcess has stipulated we'll be one of those vendors, right? We'll be one of those vendors. When we were interacting with PayPal and Stripe and Authorize.net and American Express and Evo and TrustWave, when we were interacting with all these people, we said, if Nexcess steps in with our own product called Safe Harbor, if we step in and say, we will apply patches. Because it's open source, there's not one vendor, we're a vendor, and if a vendor provides those patches, would you have that, do you have a problem? Are you stipulating that you won't support and or process payments when a vendor says they are continuing to support? And almost all of them was like, well, no, that's not what we're saying. And you go, right. You were making the assumption that since Adobe wouldn't do it, no one would do it. But you weren't disqualifying that someone could do it. And everyone say, well, we need to dig in deeper, right? Our partners over at Stripe were like, yeah, let's get into it. Let's go get understanding of what you're doing, because we want to work with you, because we think this is a great opportunity to go together to the market and say, yeah, use Stripe and use Safe Harbor from Nexcess, and let's go together and keep your Magento 1 stores safe and PCI compliant. So myth number 2, you're not going to have a problem collecting payments, right? Especially if you're using Nexcess Safe Harbor. All right. One of the other dynamics is, hey, you know what? On July 4th, your Magento stuff is not going to be safe anymore, and you're gonna be exposing your customer data. No, not true. Not true at all. There is no magical flag in the software that will suddenly publish your customer data to some random site that is going to make it available for everyone else. No, that's not happening. There's not certain locks on certain data in your database that are suddenly going to unlock on July 1st. Not true, right? What people are hinting at is, hey, if you run out-of-date software and you're not proactively patching it, and you're not taking care of it, and you're not monitoring it, and you're not putting any infrastructure around it to keep it safe, then someone could more easily attack an outdated version of software, potentially break in, and then potentially take customer data. And you go, yeah, first of all, that was a lot of potentiallys. That was a lot of if, and you're chaining all that, and that's its own job. But most hosts, not just Nexcess, most hosts that are hosting an e-commerce store know that. And so, of course, they will work with you to protect it, right? At Nexcess, I can tell you, and part of our Safe Harbor product is all of the security on the outside, right? The intrusion detection, the malware detection and remediation, all these things that say we want to keep your software clean, protected, safe. And so insofar as we protect from malicious actors who are trying to do something bad, insofar as we can detect it and let you know and let our support team know, then your data is going to be fine. Now, a lot of hosts will do some of that, right? A lot of hosts will do the intrusion detection, or they'll put some mod sec rules in place and make sure that if they start seeing something weird, they'll get into it. Our Nexcess Safe Harbor product has added more layers, which gives you more protection, right? which is a good thing. That's what you want. It also will deliver patches to you, right? And so those patches are the very reason why we created our Safe Harbor product, but also they're the very reason why I can tell you your data and your client data are gonna be safe. Because the way in which your client data would have to not be safe is you'd have to strip away malware detection, you have to strip away intrusion and bad bot detection, you have to strip away all that stuff. Then you'd have to have an outdated piece of software that you don't patch. And then some malicious vector would have to come in and get access to your data and then start passing it out. We built Nexcess Safe Harbor to protect you on all different layers from that from happening. When you put on Nexcess Safe Harbor, you put on extra hardware, extra defense mechanisms, shields, right? For lack of a better term, right? You're putting on layers. I bought a new car last year, and they said, bring it in a couple weeks, and we're gonna spray it with this magical protective gear, right? That will protect it from scratches, paint chips, even, I don't know what it was, like, the acidity of rain and bird droppings and whatever. And you're just like, that's just magical. And you're like, yeah, it's included. Just bring the car in and we'll take care of it. And you go, wow. Well, that's what our Nexcess Safe Harbor product is. It's a whole suit that you just put on top that protects you on all these different layers, from IP detection, bad bot detection, malware detection, malware repudiation, and additionally patches. Patches so that your software doesn't leave an opening, that someone has detected and said, there's a gap in this right here, and someone could maliciously get in. Well, let's go protect it so that you don't have that problem. So your customer data is not in jeopardy, especially if you're hosting it with Nexcess and our Safe Harbor product. It's not in jeopardy. You're not gonna suddenly have bad code that goes sideways and ruin your website. It's not gonna happen. All right. Fourth one. Hey, they said, there's no more agencies that work with Magento 1. So if you don't move to Magento 2, there's gonna be nobody here to help you with your store. Of all the different lies out there, this one feels like it's the most egregious one, right? Because it makes you feel alone. If you're a merchant and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I won't have anyone to do this for me. I didn't design or build this website. I am not someone who wants to go in and update this website. I am not. Well, it's a lie. There are companies. At Nexcess, we've spent the last year building up a whole set of partners. And we've had partners years before that. But specifically in the last year, as we were building the Nexcess Safe Harbor product, we started talking to agencies saying, I know you're a partner already, and I know you're doing a lot of Magento 2, but will you support a Magento 1 customer? Because we're gonna create our Nexcess Safe Harbor product, and we're gonna have a lot of Magento 1 stores, and I wanna be able to tell them that you can help them, that you're still around. And a bunch of them were like, yep, I got folks. And not just folks, I got certified folks. I got certified engineers who will come and help you. Also, by the way, if those customers of yours, they said to me, want to move to Magento 2, we have ways to do it. We have programs. And you go, okay, that's all I wanted to hear, right? So our partner team has been working through and working with a whole bunch of these partners to help you if you're still on Magento 1 and saying, hey, I need someone to come and work on my website. Which brings us to the last one, right? The last myth I want to bust today, the last lie that you've likely heard out there, right? And that is, if you went even a year ago, if you went out and you started asking people, what does it cost to move from Magento 1 to Magento 2? I know, because we did it about a year and a half ago, right? We went out and we surveyed a bunch of agencies, not Nexcess partners, but just out there, random agencies. We did web searches, we found them, and we asked them, I have a Magento 1 store, I have 10,000 products, or maybe I have 1,000 products and 10,000 orders. We gave them some stipulations and we said, how much would it cost to move? And over again, we got numbers that were astronomically high. 100,000, 150,000, 200,000. And you're like, that's insane. Now, granted, right, just to be perfectly honest, they were telling us Well, you know, it's not just pushing a button and migrating. It's a full replatform. Magento 1 and Magento 2 are not the same underlying infrastructure, not the same code base. All those modules you're using over there, you're gonna have to find either replacements or the custom code you did over there has to be custom recoded over here. I understood why we were getting those quotes. Those are expensive quotes. And now, right, if you're sitting here in June and you haven't moved to Magento 2, I can tell you that not only would it be very expensive, it takes time. You can't spin up a new Magento 2 site and port all your content over and get it all ready to launch all in 3 weeks. That's not going to happen. So some of you may think, well, then that's it. I got to go to another platform. I got to go somewhere else because I'm not going to be able to do that. Well, that's not true. And you don't have to spend $100,000 to $200,000 to get to Magento 2. We have taught, again, over the last year, we have talked to a series of agency partners who have created Quick Start, all different names for what is a lightweight, rapid move to Magento 2. Weeks, not months, not quarters, not years. They'll do it for fixed, some not fixed, but others, fixed prices. And you go, whoa, seriously? They go, yeah, and we will migrate your content. And we will drop in a default theme. And we will get some of our extensions that we already have, some of our modules that we already have, we'll put in play to give you some of these additional features. We'll do all that for a fixed amount of money, and we'll do it in a set of weeks. And you go, wow. Now, that is not, we are going to create a total replication of your current design. That is not, we're going to recreate every custom module you had. That's not what we're talking about. But we're talking about, we have agencies for a fixed budget that will move you and it won't break the bank. Now, more importantly, we even have 1 or 2 agencies that are talking about, well, you know what, we can, if we do the migration, but also we're the agency that continues to update and maintain and help you with the site, we can do it on a different plan that is a monthly fee and we won't charge you up front. Like we will basically finance the project over the next year or 2, right? And you go, that's amazing. So the truth is, right, when people tell you there's nobody that's going to work on your Magento 1 store, right? When they tell you moving to Magento 2 is going to cost you 150 to 200,000, and therefore you should check out Shopify, or therefore you should check out BigCommerce, or whatever it is they tell you to do, that's not exactly the case. Yeah, there are other alternatives out there to look at, but the reality is that there are some agencies that will help you move to Magento 2, and it won't kill you. What's my point with all this? Right? Why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because honestly, and I think we have this experience, the reason I use the theme today of automobiles and car mechanics and all, in terms of financing, here's our finance guy. The reason I use this metaphor is because for me personally, every time I take the car into a mechanic, I feel like there is information, knowledge, and experience asymmetry. The mechanic knows way more, has done it more often. He has all the cards, right? The mechanic is the smart one, the mechanic is the experienced one, and the mechanic has all the power to just decide and define what my car needs to have happen or not. And I have less information, less experience. I have almost none of the power. And in that kind of asymmetric dynamic, the way in which you need help is for someone to come alongside, step in the middle of that and say, hey, hold on a second. Here's some questions to ask, or here's some ways to think about it, or here's some truth to know, so that we can go, oh, okay, wow, that's different than I thought. If you've ever taken your car to a mechanic and taken your mechanic buddy with you, right? And then the mechanic goes, oh, da, 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 and then your buddy goes, that would be true, except in this car, this happens, and then they go, oh yeah, you're right, I guess you don't need that. And you're like, ooh, secret weapon. So today, the whole point of this webinar was to be that secret weapon, to come alongside you, right? To comfort you, to give you reality and truth. And truth was that it's not as bad as people are saying out there, right? And the truth that says, we designed and built a product called Nexcess Safe Harbor that specifically is designed to protect your Magento 1 store. And let's be clear, I'm not pitching you on it. I'm the VP of product. I'm not the VP of sales, even though our sales guys are awesome. But I'm just telling you, I'm not pitching you. This is a no pitch webinar. I'm just telling you it exists. And I'm telling you, as the VP of product, we built it specifically so that you could say, I'm looking at other alternatives and I'm looking at Magento 2 and I'm talking to your partners, but everyone tells me this is going to take a little bit. And I said, great, let's just give them an insurance plan for the interim. While your Magento 1 store is still on Magento 1, while it is still taking in orders, while you want it to maintain PCI compliance, while all these things are happening, let's give people a solution that protects them. And then if they want to go to Magento 2, that's great. If they want to look at other options, that's great. But this will keep them going. And so logically, you might ask, well, how long? How long will it go? We want Safe Harbor to keep a Magento 1 store safe and secure throughout 2020 and throughout 2021. I make no promises about what happens in 2022 or 2023, 2024, etc. The promise I'm making is that if it's going to take you a year and a half to get everything in order and to get everything moved over, to get your evaluation plus your decision plus your migration all complete, you have the time you need, because we built Nexcess Safe Harbor to keep you safe during that time. And these things that you hear out in the market are predominantly half-truths with enough twist to make you want to take action too quickly. And the last thing you want to do with an e-commerce store is act without thinking, act without planning, because you're going to make mistakes. And that's going to be downtime and that's going to be lost revenue. We want you to be able to take your time, to be careful, and to make your decision deliberately. And so with that, I will say, hey, what questions do you have? And I'm happy to answer any of them.
Thanks, Chris. That was really informative. I appreciate it. And thanks to Jose and Mukesh for stopping in the webinar. It looked like they had to jump out, but they said, you know, your information was great. The example of the mechanic I felt was really spot on. Jack had a question here, a couple great questions from Jack. He was curious about additional cost for the current service for Safe Harbor.
So our Safe Harbor product is an additional fee on top of your hosting. It presumes you're hosting with us, and it presumes that that we can look at what plan you're on. It is about 30% of a tax, if you will, on your existing plan. So let's say that you had $100 a month hosting, you'd have $130 a month hosting now with Safe Harbor, right? That $30 extra would be a month, would be the Safe Harbor. Obviously, if you're spending $1,000 a month, then it would be $1,300, right? So it doesn't increment, it doesn't get crazy. It's just a flat percentage to give you all those additional resources to protect you and keep you safe. And we also add staging environments to let you test out some of those updates, right? The PHP version updates and other updates. So there's a whole bunch that comes in that value at the 30%, but we think of it as, hey, it's a much smaller monthly fee than quickly spending money on a very large migration. So this is why you hear me use the term insurance, right? It is an insurance plan, although this is more active and proactive than your regular insurance, which just waits for something to happen. We are both on the proactive and reactive side, trying to take care of your site, and so we just do it as a fixed percentage of your hosting part. But to be clear, it's of your hosting fee. It's not all the other fees. So if you have dev environments and you have SSL certs that are at a different guarantee level, if you have other payments or other fees or whatever, it's not part of that. It's just part of the hosting fees.
Yeah, a couple follow-up questions that have come in. And so, is this just for the dedicated servers, or is this just for shared hosting? How was this for all of our platform on the entire infrastructure, or how does that work?
This is for everyone. So we built it and designed it for our cloud services. So if you're on cloud, that was the genesis of where we built it. Then we had folks from other hosting companies that wanted to come over, but they wanted to come over and use our dedicated boxes and not be on the cloud. We have a slightly different version of Safe Harbor for them. So really, if you're hosting with us on any of these fronts, right, whether it's dedicated or cloud or whatever, we're going to take care of you if you want safe harbor.
Awesome. Sean had a great question here. So Sean looks to have a fair amount of custom code on their site. They do have a programmer, in-house programmer who's done extensive updates, PHP 7, etc. What role will the Nexcess support team play in patches, and where are those patches coming from?
That's a great question. So to be clear, right? What we're patching is the core of the code base. We are not promising a patch on your developer's custom code. So there is still going to be a role for your developer if your developer is active and creating new stuff. Just, you know, like I don't know what your developer's doing, so I can't say, oh, for a fixed fee, we're also going to go and patch everything that, like, your guy may have spent 10 years writing custom code. So if you have a developer on staff who's doing custom code for you, we would tell you, okay, let's just make sure that they're also paying attention to what's happening out there. And we will be happy to be in contact with them as we are rolling out patches to make sure that they understand the impact analysis. That's also why we create a staging environment so they can go test their new code with our new patch and make sure everything's copacetic. So that's one part of it. Another part is where these patches coming from. Well, we have internal developers who are writing it. There is a Mage 1 fork of Magento, the community edition that's out there. We are working with them as partners. So some of the patches they're doing over there will likely apply to us, and some of the patches we do in Safe Harbor will likely apply to them. And then we also are working with a couple of agencies where we are asking them to participate with us to build some of these patches. So multiple sources of patches, because we didn't want to put all our eggs in one basket, or we didn't want to delay a different patch simply because some other group of people or some of our internal people were working on one patch over here. We want the most throughput, the most support for the most amount of patches to make sure that your store stays safe.
You also, you mentioned some payment processors that we may have been working with. Can you name some of the ones that you've been working with? There's a question here, has BluePay been one of the payment processors, or who are the other ones you have spoken with?
So we've spoken to a lot, and unfortunately, I can't remember all of them. I rattled off a list of some of the ones that I do remember having conversations with that were more explicit. What I can tell you is this, right? You can look for, just like PayPal made one announcement that was kind of big that said, hey, you should move to Magento 2, even though if you call them up directly, and we've seen several people call them directly, write them directly, and get a very different answer than what was in that really scary notification, and they're not going to turn off payment processing or what have you. But unlike the way PayPal did it, Stripe is on the other hand. Stripe is like, this is a great time for us to work with and make sure, like, I think last week Stripe did an update to its Magento 1 integration. Like, they're like, we're not stopping now. We're going to keep doubling in and making sure that Stripe 1 stays, that Stripe and Magento 1 stay healthy and doing well. And so we're working with them. So I would tell you, if you're not using Stripe, take a look at Stripe. But we've talked to a bunch that have said, listen, we're not in the business, authorize.net, right? We're not in the business of turning on or turning off a payment gateway or processor simply because of what underlying code base they're running. We will check to make sure they're PCI compliant. We will, if they're not PCI compliant, we will raise issues and you open yourself up to fines. But we're not in the business of checking your code and figuring out what you're using and whether or not you're using something out of date. So authorize.net's like, that's not my business. That's not what I do. All of them point back to companies like TrustWave, right? And so that's where we started our more deeper conversations. Specifically on BluePay, I don't know. And I'm not the only one talking to payment vendors, so one of our staff may have talked to them. I will dig in and see if we have communication with them, and if we do, I'm more than happy to publish that out and let people know about it.
There's a lot of questions here, Chris, asking, how do you turn Safe Harbor on? How is this a product that can get started?
Yeah, great question.
How is it added into a system? And is it specific to Nexcess only clients?
It is. Let me answer the second part first, right? This is a Nexcess product. So if you go somewhere else and host somewhere else, the first thing you can do is call them up, right? imaginary call, right? You're like, you know, hey, Rackspace, tell me what you're doing for my sites after, Magento 1 after July 1st. And they're like, you should not be on Magento 1 after July 1st. You're like, okay, so you're not doing anything. Great. That's a great opportunity to move your site over to Nexcess. But your host, maybe there are a couple of hosts out there that are trying to do something. And so you may find that one of your hosts is trying to do something. And so you can evaluate that in comparison. But if you bring your stuff here, we have a system that will monitor your, all the sites on our platform. And when they see that you're running Magento 1, often you'll get a pop-up in the backend control panel that says, hey, do you want to turn on Safe Harbor? So that's one way to do it. Another, and my favorite way, is talk to a sales guy, right? Our sales folks are fantastic. And if you reach out to one of our sales folks and say, here's my situation. I'm on a dedicated box. I'm on a cluster. I'm on cloud. Right? Just talk to them. They can add it to your account, right? So talk to them so you understand the nuances as it relates to each of the different infrastructures. But you can get it either via the control panel or you can get it via talking to one of our sales folks.
Yeah, and so I'm going to put a question out to the audience here real quick. I'm going to launch a poll, and the simple question is, if you want somebody to contact you after this wasn't supposed to be a sales webinar. This really, like Chris says, was education. But if you go ahead and raise your hand, answer the question simply on the poll right now. Do you want someone to contact you? Yes, no, and we'll make sure that we get somebody in touch with you, because there has been a lot of questions about how to get this started, and we want to make sure that everyone gets it started and feels safe come July 1st. So go ahead and answer that poll right now.
Yep, answer, because our salespeople are like, you may not know this, right? Magento itself, the code base, right, was started in our basement. So you remember those stories of Apple getting started, Wozniak and Jobs in a basement building stuff out? Well, the first servers that hosted Magento were here at Nexcess, right? We have supported Nexcess from the get-go, and some of our sales guys have been around forever. You know them, they know you. They've been in the Magento space forever, and they are fantastic resources. So if you want to talk to someone who knows their stuff, right, click on the yes, please do right away, and we can get you connected to one of these folks. They can answer some of your questions, right? And if you have more advanced questions, or if you have other questions they can't answer, they'll circle back to whether it's our product team or our engineering team. We can get you an answer.
All right, looks like we have about 50%. If you guys, we'll give you, I don't know, another 30 seconds here if you want to answer that poll, if you haven't gotten a chance to yet. While that's being answered, Chris, one of the questions that just came in is how long will Safe Harbor be good for? Do we have a date on that?
Yep. So I mentioned it. I may have gone too fast. Our goal is to keep everything safe and protected through the end of next year. So not 2020, but 2021. So as of right now, about 18 months, right? 18 months of support, which we believe is enough time for us to connect you up. If you don't have an agency partner, we can find you one, right? The first step is getting a partner. The next is evaluating your options. The next is deciding from there what you want to do. And we believe that finding a partner, evaluating options, planning a migration, and doing a migration to another platform, if that's what you want to do, you can do all four of those things in 18 months without issue. And so that's why we've said, let's give it that amount of time.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm going to close the poll now. One more question that came up on PCI compliance here is actually a really good question. Is Google is going to be throwing up alerts about non-PCI compliant sites. Is there a way for your users, our clients on Safe Harbor to test and make sure that they're staying PCI compliant? What is the best way for them to action that so that they are PCI compliant with Safe Harbor?
So it's very interesting. I'm not sure how Google is going to do an alert for PCI compliance, right? I don't know what they're going to. I mean, I can understand if they're doing it for their own infrastructure, right? But the PCI DSS, right, which is the payment card industry data security standards, right? is not something that you can measure or monitor from the outside of a website, right? That's why those scans have to get into your infrastructure, run against your servers, et cetera. Plus, part of the standards are related to merchants and what data they hold in file cabinets, right? It's also related to how many different servers, like the database server is separate from the web server, right? And those things have different passwords, whatever. There's no way Google finds that out or figures that out from the outside browsing and hitting a website. That is the equivalent of Google trying to tell you whether or not your website is not safe because of malware, right? They can only tell you about the malware that expresses itself externally on your website. They can't tell you what's hidden in your database because they can't get to it. So again, and I'm not saying that Google is lying to you. I'm just saying it's a half statement. Yeah, Google can, if your site is showing externally that there is a problem with it, Google can catch that, much like it catches malware that's selling Viagra on your homepage, and it can say, ding, ding, we think there's a foul here. And you go, that's great, they can do that. But they can't introspect all the way into your infrastructure and determine whether or not you are following all the PCI DSS. That's just not, it's not possible, unless something happened last week that I don't know about. And it could have happened last week and I don't know about it because there's a lot of smart people over there. But in general, it is most likely going to be an external message when your site actually has problems, right? And of course, what we want to do is protect you from having those problems, not specifically related to PCI compliance alone, but broadly, how do we protect you in a bigger sense? So it'll be interesting. It's worth digging in more and seeing, okay, what is Google actually suggesting when it relates to this? Because I don't know how they're going to put a banner on your site that says, we think there's a chance that this payment gateway is not right or accurate. That payment gateway is sitting way in the back end, right? So that's as best as I can answer that question right now.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see how they do it for sure. It looks like we've answered a lot of the questions. Give a couple more minutes if anybody has anything else they want to ask. But I appreciate everyone joining us for the webinar today. I hope it really cleared up a lot of the confusion that's been out there. Thanks for Chris for laying out all of the great examples that you did. It really does help out to have them, explained as well as you did. But it looks like we're all set here with the questions. So if you guys do have any questions, you can feel free. You can hit us up on any one of our social channels. You can go ahead and respond to any of the emails that we'll send out. If you've answered, you're looking for information right away, we'll make sure to get that out to our sales team and get them contacting you ASAP. And hopefully you guys learned a lot today, and I appreciate everybody for coming by. So I think that's it for today, and we'll talk to you guys soon.